You ever get that feeling that the world is just getting riskier? Like the ground beneath our feet, our whole global system, is shifting in some fundamental way? Well, you're not wrong. It's not just a feeling. We are living through a massive change in the very nature of risk. And you know, the evidence, it's been hiding in plain sight, right there in the fine print of the world's insurance policies. So let's break it all down.
Our story kicks off with a crisis. And look, this isn't some hypothetical scenario. This was a real-world dislocation that brought a critical piece of the global economy to a grinding halt. Just picture it. It's February 2026. Tensions in the Middle East finally boil over. And then, just like that, the world's single most important energy corridor, the Strait of Hormuz, effectively shuts down.
And this is what that shutdown looked like. Daily ship traffic through the Strait just collapsed by 90%. 90. We're talking about 20 million barrels of oil a day. That's a fifth of the entire world's supply, suddenly getting choked off. The global economy, you can bet, held its breath. But here's the thing. This event wasn't the cause of the problem. It was really the final symptom of a much, much deeper illness.
And that brings us to the big question we're tackling here. Why are the very systems we've built to protect us from catastrophe, the global insurance markets, why are they starting to back away? Why are things that we always assumed were covered, things like pandemics or huge geopolitical events, suddenly getting stamped with a new label, uninsurable? To figure that out, we have to rewind the clock a bit. See, the crisis in 2026 didn't just pop up out of nowhere. It was really the final straw after an unprecedented 6-year stress test on the entire global system. And this stress test came in the form of 4 huge, distinct, and just relentless shocks. Let's just walk through this timeline because you can really see how one thing piled on top of the next. First, you get the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. Then, just as we're all trying to catch our breath, bam, a global inflation shock hits in 2021. That's followed immediately by the war in Ukraine in 2022. Then the disruptions in the Red Sea kick off in 2023, which all leads up to that final crisis in the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, any one of these would have been a massive deal on its own. But together, they triggered a seismic shift.
Okay, so now it's time to do a little investigating. We're going to treat each one of these 4 shocks like a culprit in a crime, and we're going to dissect exactly how each one played a part in completely breaking the old rules of risk.
So first up, COVID-19. This one was totally different than, say, a hurricane or an earthquake. It wasn't a physical disaster. It was a systemic one. And I love how this is framed here, a legal bomb, because that's exactly what it was. The whole crisis for the insurance world boiled down to one single question. Does your standard business insurance policy cover a government-ordered shutdown? The answer to that question would end up costing the industry billions and billions of dollars.
And you can really see the fallout here. All the damage came from arguments over the specific wording in these business interruption policies. And it hurt everybody, from your local restaurant all the way up to global airlines. The final price tag? An absolutely staggering $107 billion in global insured losses. That sparked over 1,000 lawsuits in the U.S. alone. It was by far the largest non-natural catastrophe insurance loss in history.
And this right here, this is the permanent scar that COVID left behind. Because after paying out all that money, the insurance industry basically said, never again. They made a huge structural change. They decided they simply could not afford to cover that kind of system-wide risk. An entire category of risk was just taken off the table.
All right, on to culprit number 2, inflation. Now, unlike the sudden jolt of the pandemic, this was more like a slow-burning fire. It wasn't a big, single event, but this corrosive force that just ate away at the very foundations of the insurance business model. Think about it. It made everything more expensive to replace, from car parts to lumber to legal bills. And at the exact same time, it was eroding the value of the money insurers had saved up to pay for those things.
And you can see the damage right here. In 2021 alone, the rising cost of claims added an extra $30 billion to the industry's tab. That's on top of the normal trend. You combine that with losses on their investments as interest rates went up, and you saw reinsurance capital, their backup money, fall by over 15%. It was just this massive financial squeeze coming from every direction.
The third shock, the war in Ukraine, was a completely different animal. This one was super concentrated, both in where it happened and what it hit. Now, what's so fascinating here is the description, assets trapped by ink on paper. See, the biggest insurance loss didn't come from planes being shot down. No, it came from hundreds of commercial jets being legally stranded inside Russia because of sanctions and counter-sanctions. They were trapped by legal documents, not by force.
And the result was the single largest aviation insurance loss ever. We're talking somewhere between $10 and $13 billion worth of aircraft just gone. This kicked off years of incredibly complicated lawsuits between the leasing companies who own the planes and their insurers, which, by the way, only reached a landmark court ruling in the middle of 2025.
And that brings us to our fourth and really most immediate shock, the crisis at the world's maritime choke points. It all started with the Houthi attacks in the Red Sea back in 2023, and then it escalated dramatically to the virtual closure of the Strait of Hormuz in 2026. This is where geopolitics got very real, very fast, translating directly into drones and missiles physically hitting commercial ships. And this chart just shows you the market's reaction perfectly. Just look at the cost of war risk insurance for a ship. To go through the Red Sea, the price jumped by 40 times in a single year. By the time the Strait of Hormuz crisis hit, it cost 10% of the entire ship's value for just one trip. I mean, to put that in perspective, insuring one voyage went from being the cost of a family car to the cost of a house. At that price, the insurance market wasn't just raising rates, it was effectively shutting the route down.
So, we've investigated all four shocks. What's the final verdict? Well, it's pretty clear this wasn't just a string of bad luck. This was a fundamental reset. The old assumptions about how the world works are gone, and now we're all playing by a new set of rules for global risk.
Okay, this right here is probably the most important point of the whole thing. We have to separate what's temporary from what's permanent. Sure, prices are sky high right now and it's hard to get coverage, but those things are cyclical, they'll eventually even out. What is not temporary, what's here to stay, are the structural changes. We're talking about brand new exclusions for things like pandemics and state-backed attacks that are being written into the very DNA of insurance policies. Those aren't going away.
So let's look at these new rules. Rule number 1, communicable diseases are now excluded. It's really simple. After the historic losses from COVID, your standard business insurance policy will almost certainly not cover you if another pandemic shuts down your business. That risk is now officially considered uninsurable by the private market. Full stop.
And here's rule number 2, which is a direct consequence of what we saw happen in Ukraine. Insurers are now formally writing out any losses that come from a cyber attack that was carried out by a nation-state. What used to be a kind of murky gray area is now a hard black and white line. Cyber warfare? That's now officially outside the lines of what your standard commercial policy is going to cover.
Okay, so we've been talking high-level stuff. 4 huge global shocks, rewritten insurance rules, but let's bring it down to earth. What does all this actually mean for businesses, for the stuff you buy, and frankly, for you?
Well, this matters a whole lot, because we're all connected to this system. It means our supply chains are way more fragile now that insurers won't cover certain key trade routes. It means the cost of pretty much everything from gas to groceries could go up to cover these new uninsured risks. But the biggest thing is this. Society as a whole now has to deal with a growing list of massive risks, pandemics, wars, you name it, that we can no longer just hand off to an insurance company to solve.
Which leaves us with one last, pretty big question. For decades, we've counted on the private insurance market to be the financial shock absorber for our biggest disasters. But if that market is now taking a step back from our most existential threats, pandemics, wars, the effects of climate change, it forces us all to ask, in this new age of risk, if it's not them, then who is going to be the insurer of last resort?